This episode of Primitive Culture is brought to you by Audible.com, offering more than 180,000 titles for smartphone, tablet, and desktop. To get a free audiobook of your choice and to help Trek FM at the same time, visit audibletrial.com/trekfm.
And also by Enterprise in Space, an international program of the non-profit National Space Society. Find out how you can help science and education and become a virtual crew member aboard the NSS Enterprise Orbiter by visiting enterpriseinspace.org.
And if you want to join the conversation and share your thoughts on this episode, join the Babel Conference, our listeners group on Facebook. Just type BABEL into the Facebook search field. We look forward to seeing you there.
This is Tim Russ, Lieutenant Commander Tuvok on Star Trek Voyager, and you're listening to Trek FM.
Open your mind to the past. All this may mean something.
I've been coerced into watching tonight's movie.
You do have books in the 24th century.
It's a primitive culture. I'm just trying to blend in.
Some people think the future means the end of history. We haven't run out of history quite yet.
Hello and welcome to Primitive Culture, a Trek FM podcast all about our history, our culture and how Star Trek relates to it. I'm Duncan Barrett and I'm joined as ever by my co-host Clara Cook, and today we have a very special guest with us. We have Carlos Miranda from TrekNews.net, a friend of ours from the Destination Star Trek convention. Recently, some of you will have heard Carlos on the episode that we did with our interviews with the various DS9 actors and Ira Stephen Bear and so on. You managed to get the story out of Ira about his ring, which that was a good spot.
That was a good spot. I mean, the guy was sitting right next to us and he had this giant Deep Space Nine ring. So you kind of have to ask about it, right?
See, I was fixated on the beard. It didn't occur to me to look at his hands.
That's very true. The bright blue beard is very distracting.
But it's great to have you with us, Carlos. And we're recording live at the London School of Economics in London. And this is a very special episode for us. This is almost a kind of anniversary episode in a sense. It's our episode 47. And as a result, we are looking at in-jokes and Easter eggs in Star Trek, because as many of you will already know, the number 47 is a very significant number in the Star Trek universe. Clara, do you want to give us a little bit of background about the number 47 for anyone who's not familiar with it?
I actually know nothing about the number. I don't know. So I will admit that I think that Star Trek fans often fall into two camps. There are the people that do spot the Easter eggs, and then there are the people that don't always spot the Easter eggs until they're pointed out to them. And unfortunately, I am in the camp of someone that doesn't ever see them until I'm on the Babel conference and I see that people are talking about something. I think I did notice that 47 did appear quite a lot, but I thought it was because 47 was kind of a nice number.
Well, it is part of that, I think, because it does feel like a kind of... I think part of it is it feels like a random number somehow. It's one of these numbers that people pluck out of the air.
But it looks good written down as well.
Right, yeah. I was recently watching an episode of Doctor Who from a couple of years ago, and there was this whole thing about supposedly random numbers there, where people kept, basically they were in some weird simulation or something, and the proof that the simulation wasn't real was that anyone who was asked to come up with a random number or a sequence of random numbers, they all came up with the same numbers. Right. And because of this idea that a computer can't generate kind of truly random numbers. And the interesting thing about the 47, the story, I'll do the background, Clara, since I've got it written down in front of me. It came via Joe Menosky, was the one who brought the 47s into Star Trek. And this was because he'd studied at Pomona College in California, where in 1963, one of the mathematics professors had given a lecture where he claimed... Look, you talk about...
You're the academic.
In your head. I don't, maths does not register for me. But apparently he made this argument that all numbers are in some sense equal. And the example that he gave was that all numbers were equal to 47. And as a result, in this particular college in the United States, they're kind of obsessed with the number 47. And it's become, I think, among the students there, not just this kind of theoretical proof that in some arbitrary sense all numbers are 47, but they have almost kind of come to this idea of, there's a glitch in the matrix, there's something kind of sinister or mysterious going on, because they see 47s everywhere. And, if you look at their college magazine and so on, they still have this kind of 47 hunt. I mean, it is, we're talking about Easter eggs, it is almost like an Easter egg hunt the 47s. And obviously in Star Trek, once Joe Menosky came on board, he sort of started bringing this idea of seeding these 47s throughout the Star Trek universe, and the other writers all kind of came on board and it became a kind of running joke.
Yeah. I mean, I think what's interesting about that is that we were just talking about this before we started recording, that I think that there is a difference between in-jokes and Easter eggs, right? But at the same time, I feel like you could do so many in-jokes that then they become Easter eggs, if that makes sense, right?
Yeah.
But I think
if you've done them enough times,
exactly, and people expect them, then people start looking out for them, and then I think it kind of morphs from much more of an in-joke to an Easter egg, right? But I think Star Trek, what's interesting is that Clara was saying this, that I think that for a lot of the times, I think up until a certain point, up until I think maybe the Kelvin universe and Discovery, that most of Star Trek was very referential. So it was much more about, hey, did you spot the fact that Bashir is having the same plum soup that Spock had in this episode?
Right,
so it was a lot more about kind of in-jokes within and referring to things that came that had happened in the past of other series of Star Trek. And it wasn't until kind of later on, really, that I think Easter eggs really started. All of a sudden you have the Millennium Falcon in First Contact or R2-D2 in Star Trek 09, like really kind of finding these Easter eggs.
And sort of breaking, not quite the fourth wall, but sort of breaking the reality in a sense, whereas some of those earlier examples, are they Easter eggs? Are they just continuity? They're kind of soft continuity in a way. They're kind of little hints. And especially, say, with a show like Deep Space Nine, I think a lot of people have pointed out Deep Space Nine is very heavily referencing the original series a lot of the time, because that's the kind of series that really informed that show as much as it came out of the Next Generation. I think for a lot of the writers, the original series was their Star Trek. And that was the series, having gone through this period with Next Gen where there was almost a kind of edict, not, don't mention this or don't mention the original series. Essentially there was this big row about, in the episode Sarek, could they even use the word Spock? Because that was seen as so, it was just this weight, essentially, that Star Trek had hanging around its neck. And the idea was that, we really don't want to reference all this stuff. But as you go into later Star Trek, you get more and more. And certainly, and you get that as well, say in Voyager, you get a couple of references to Captain Kirk, to the original Enterprise, this kind of idea of referencing Star Trek's own history. Yeah. And it's true, I don't know whether you count that as an Easter egg exactly, but it sort of is... It is in that sort of similar vein of kind of something that's maybe there for the fans, something that's maybe there for the writers as well. Yeah. But just thinking about these 47s, I mean, I don't know whether initially, so Joe Menosky sort of brought this, and I think he's done it in his other work outside Star Trek as well, because, he's part of this kind of weird club of 47 obsessives. But obviously that, I think, was something that probably initially was seen as a joke within the writing room, or, that a very small number of people would get, and then gradually, as it became more and more exposed and there became more and more of them, obviously it became something that fans became familiar with. I've just got a couple of examples here, just for anyone who I don't know, either doesn't believe this or wants to know. One of my favourite ones was in Darmok. There are 47 meanings to the word Darmok. That's because that's one of my favourite Joe Menosky episodes, so I love that one. In iBorg, you might notice the whatever it is, the sort of, here we come up against my maths again, that kind of impossible program, that impossible image or whatever it is that they're trying, is labelled 4747. So that's kind of an obvious one. And often you see 47 on, in First Contact, the screen that the Admiral is talking to Picard on has a 47 on it and so on. One of the nicer ones I thought, because sometimes they get a bit more clever, in Descent, the hand of poker that Stephen Hawking wins with is 4 sevens. So that is, and that's obviously a joke. Like, that's not just, okay, we need a number here. That's someone thinking, we're going to be a bit clever here. See if our colleagues notice it, see if the viewers notice it, etc. And one of my other favourite ones, apparently, according to Voyager, I know this because I spent the weekend looking online, and people have gone on the 47 Easter egg hunt. They have collected hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of these examples. And a lot of them are quite mundane. They are quite boring. They're just like a number on a wall or a number on a pad or something. But one that I quite liked from Voyager was that apparently the Prime Directive has 47 sub-directives. So, there's a kind of something so fundamental to Star Trek, this sort of key document in a sense. And again, there's the 47 kind of right at the heart of it.
So one of the things I thought was quite different from Easter eggs, and this is an example, I think 47 really is an Easter egg. Probably, like you say, it started out as sort of like an in-joke for the writers. And you have to actually question, what is an in-joke that the writers have with each other, or an in-joke that the production team have with each other, and what is actually something that is aimed at the fans. But 47 obviously is an Easter egg, but I thought the Easter eggs is people hunt for them. Whereas the sort of references you're talking about, I felt a little bit more, I like to sort of flesh out the Star Trek universe, make it seem more realistic. and sort of give the background story colour. You know, so Bashir eating the same type of soup that Spock likes is to sort of make it seem like the cuisine of Star Trek is, you know, universal across the galaxy, whatever. Like people are eating similar dishes or whatever.
It makes it feel more real.
It makes it feel more real. It puts Deep Space Nine in the
yeah.
same context as, you know, the original series. Whereas Easter eggs, I feel, are slightly different. I feel they are like, and it goes back to what Easter eggs originally were. Weren't they originally something that was a part of a video game that you had to hunt for?
Yeah.
And people who were really into that video game would either have to do some sort of cheat or do some sort of action, and they'd find that Easter egg, and that was like your prize. And so I think looking for the 47s, people feel a real sense of satisfaction when they found a 47, and they must feel a real sense of massive satisfaction when they found a 47 that no one else has found.
But I think,
do you see what I'm saying? It's like a treasure hunt.
But when you look up the meaning, so in preparation for this, also doing some Googling, and we were just talking about the fact that I never prepare for anything, but here I am with notes. I can show 2 pages of notes.
A lovely notebook here.
It's very true, very true.
Filled with handwritten notes, yeah.
It's very true. And no peeking, man. You're going to steal my brilliant commentary here.
It's all right. I shared my outline with you. I don't normally do that.
It's very true.
You've seen all of my notes.
It's like that episode of, I did an episode of Trek Ranks with Trek fan Rick, and he like had all of my same picks, and so I always joke that he was like spying on me, and that he's like some sort of like weird Tal Shiar like agent. But anyway, but I think that what's interesting is that when I'm kind of looking up the actual definition of Easter egg, really is, you know, when you do an Easter egg hunt, it is that. It is a hunt. It was meant originally with like the first Easter egg that I know that in your notes you talk about kind of Ready Player One and obviously and things like that, but kind of hunting for something. And so I do think that there's a big difference between an in-joke, which I think can morph into an Easter egg, and something that was placed specifically for someone to hopefully find and then get extra enjoyment out of it. Yeah. You know, I'm thinking of like the, I think it was the original Deep Space Nine DVDs. They used to have like secret menu buttons, right? And then if you were finding, there's like Section 31 file on you know.
And they'd be like 2-minute
exactly like
kind of part of the advertised special features.
You mean the ones that are in that kind of cool boxes?
Yeah.
I have those DVDs at home.
Need to find
I have no idea.
There you go.
That's the thing. And funnily enough, it's interesting you mention that, because I was going to ask you both, what was your first encounter with the concept of an Easter egg? Because for me, it wasn't through video games, it was through DVD menus. So it was exactly that idea of discovering, and not just Star Trek, I mean, a lot of DVDs in the 90s, I guess, were doing that. That, you know, if you kind of move around in the menu, you'll find there are kind of secret bits of the menu that you're not supposed to.
You just blow Clara's mind. She's like, what?
I'm going to go home. Like, put in all my DVDs.
All your old DVDs. Yeah. But it is interesting, you know, talking about Ready Player One. I mean, that is a story, you know, both in the book and the film, that is absolutely predicated on this idea of the egg hunt. And even, you know, the characters, and they talk about it as an egg hunt. I mean, they're literally, the prize at the end is in some physical form, an egg. And it's been very much established like that. They call themselves gunters or egg hunters. But it's interesting because that story, again, in both versions, in the book and the film, it has this element that the plot turns, this is a big spoiler for anyone, it's not really a big spoiler for anyone who hasn't seen or read Ready Player One, but it is a plot spoiler, turns on exactly this game from the 1979 Atari game called Adventure, which was apparently the origin of the concept of the Easter egg in video games. And what it was that the programmer who designed the game, who was a guy called Warren Robinett, was annoyed that he'd not been acknowledged. Like, there were no credits on games in those days. There was no, you know, he put all this work into this game and his work wasn't being acknowledged, basically. So he hid his name in the game, and the Easter egg was that if you moved the cursor over a particular space in the game, you managed to find out what the name was of the guy who created it. And obviously in Ready Player One, this is the kind of final of many tests and many kind of eggs that have to be sought, you know, metaphorical eggs, the secrets that have to be discovered on the kind of treasure hunt. The final one is just to play. It's actually an easy one for the main character because he knows all about it. And, you know, the reader, like me, who's never heard of Warren Robinett or Adventure or any of it, at least has picked up on it because the novel has kind of seeded this information. And actually, compared to a lot of the tasks, it's a very easy one because he knows exactly where to find it and how to get it, and that's what wins him the egg in a way. But it is interesting because in some ways you might say that's not an Easter egg in the sense that we understand it, because I mean, it's a secret. I suppose an Easter egg is always a secret. It's not like the Deep Space Nine box says, oh, and there are Easter eggs, and this is where you're going to go and find them necessarily. You do have to sort of search around for them, discover them kind of on your own terms. But in that instance, it wasn't really so much that he was putting it in there as a game or as a kind of extra bit of entertainment. He had a legitimate reason for, he felt slighted by the company he was working for. And so he put it in there as a way of getting it past his bosses, who didn't want him to be acknowledged. So they shipped out thousands of copies of this game. People were playing it all around the world or whatever. And only then did they realize that he'd sort of snuck this kind of secret in there under their noses, in a sense. So weirdly, the Easter egg started off as this kind of, not so much this kind of pleasurable game, but as a way of kind of getting across secret information somehow without anyone realizing.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think that one that's really interesting. And I think two, going back to your question though, I mean, I remember vividly as a kid, pre-DVDs, not that I'm like super old or anything, but like before DVDs, the first time that I really kind of caught an Easter egg or was really fascinated by it was that so obviously I am talking about on a Star Trek podcast. So clearly I'm obsessed with Star Trek, but as a kid, I was also obsessed with Star Wars, and I was particularly obsessed with Indiana Jones. I was obsessed with Indiana Jones. And my obsession between first Star Wars and Indiana Jones, I remember once somebody telling me, oh, do you know that I don't know who it was, but I was really little, that in the hieroglyphics behind where the Ark of the Covenant is, there's 3 of the hieroglyphics are Princess Leia, R2-D2, and C-3PO.
Right.
And I was like, oh my God. So I remember as a kid, like trying to find that scene. But you couldn't really. Exactly. You couldn't really. And obviously VHS was being a little bit darker and you couldn't really but I remember, so I think that was my first real kind of like, oh, right. There are these there are these other, there are these characters from another movie in this movie. Isn't that amazing? And then you realize, oh, actually, Spielberg would put Star Wars references in a lot of his earlier work. Like you had like the kid dressed up as Yoda in E.T. You had Club Obi-Wan, which is the club at the opening sequence in Temple of Doom. It's never really said. It's never said if it's called Club Obi-Wan, but in the background one scene, you see Club Obi-Wan.
Right.
So like that was my first real kind of experience, the fact that actually, at the end of the day, filmmakers are massive. A lot of them, especially that are working in different genres, love other things within that genre or like one over. And those things, we talk about J.J. Abrams, and all of those things influence them tremendously. And they want to pay like homage to it. They want to be like, oh, I love this, and this got me to where I am, and I'd love to kind of sneak this in to kind of have a wink at the audience to know, not the whole audience, but people like them.
Yeah. And it is almost like sort of Da Vinci Code or something, these kind of secret messages embedded in these films that you may have watched, Indiana Jones 100 times without noticing it. And that's part of the appeal, I suppose, is that with a lot of those kind of Easter eggs, they do go under the radar unless someone points them out to you. Yeah. It's interesting when we were preparing for this. I mean, this is not really a mailbag episode. We're not going to be reading out loads of the messages we got, but I did put the word out on the Babel conference and also on Twitter to try and, because I was kind of curious to see what were the kind of Easter eggs that appealed to some of our listeners and that kind of, that really worked or didn't work for people. And one of the things that came in a lot was people talking about accoutrograms and the kind of little jokes, very much in that kind of, exactly in that way, this is not on the level of the script. It's not, unlike the 47s, which are obviously sort of baked into the script in most cases. These are just purely visual things. And this is, the art department whose job it is to produce all this content, to produce all this artwork, just kind of playing around now and then and putting these, these little kind of jokey things in here and there. And actually we got a comment from Mike Akuda. I was quite pleased. He responded to my tweets asking what were your favourite accoutrograms. I will read out, I'll make an exception to it not being a mailbag episode to read out Mike Akuda's tweet. He said, if you're referring to gags in the graphics, my goal was always to keep them subtle, just on the threshold of legibility or below. If the casual viewer noticed them on first viewing, that would be a disservice to the viewer and the episode. But of course, in HD, the threshold is different. And then, so I asked him, I responded to him and said, how do you sort of feel about people going back and kind of finding all these things now if you sort of weren't really intending to find them? He said, I love it when people go back and frame by frame an episode or movie and discover something. And I also asked him what was his favourite of all the kind of gags that they put in there, because some of them are quite elaborate, some of them are quite complicated. They might be kind of visual things. They might be, for example, if there's a crew manifest, they might list real production crew. Or several people on the Babel conference pointed out things. There's a Voyager episode where there's a list of dead crewmen and they're all the senior staff of the West Wing, the TV show The West Wing. There was another one where they were all the actors who played Doctor Who, so there are these kind of references to other kind of TV properties and so on. But Mike Okuda actually said, my favourite gag was the use of the initials of production crew members on graphic button icons. And that's interesting because I suppose those are not necessarily at the level of illegibility insofar as they probably would be in focus, but they're seemingly meaningless information until you realise that actually, those initials are standing not for, fire phasers or whatever we imagine that button is supposed to be doing, but for, some member of the production team who's kind of getting their moment in the spotlight almost, almost a kind of cameo of sorts, even just it being an initial. And of course, you've got the dedication plaques, every bridge of every Star Trek starship, certainly from Next Gen onwards, I think. That's right. I don't know.
No, definitely.
But I assume not in the original series.
No, the original series didn't list any crew. Right. It just had it's a very boring plaque as opposed to what came after.
Yeah. And you can get them, of course, Eagle Moss, they produce them as well as the starships. And they will have a little quotation. They'll have a sort of a nice thing that is sort of in universe makes sense. And then they have a list of all the production team who worked on that show. So, Admiral Gene Roddenberry or Admiral Rick Berman or whoever it is as being the people who were behind that ship. Now, obviously, at the point at which it's legible, and I suppose it isn't typically legible on the screen, but they are producing them as kind of, they are publicising those things insofar as you can see them. I mean, even the Next Gen Technical Manual, I think, has the Enterprise Ds one, which lists all those production crew members. And so they're sort of a way of blurring the boundaries between the imaginary world of Star Trek and the kind of real production world of Star Trek by literally putting it there on the bridge. And it's in, out of focus, but it is effectively in every shot that's filmed on that bridge.
Well, I think it's also interesting. It's probably also a way, we talked about the Atari and the adventure, and that was a way of getting recognition for, hey, I worked really hard on this, and I would love to get recognition in a way that the general public that's consuming this piece of media can acknowledge it in some way. And I gotta imagine that Okudagrams were also a way of saying, hey, we've all worked really, really hard on this, and let's have a little fun, and let's make sure that our names are kind of, and the recognition of the work is visibly on the screen, even if it's kind of in the background.
Not just in the credits.
Exactly.
It's within the universe.
It's within the universe, exactly. And I think
magically, even though it makes no sense that there's Admiral Gene Roddenberry at Starfleet Command or whatever, it's kind of magically brought into the universe.
Totally. And it doesn't, and before, it's very rare, before the technical manuals and before the internet and before DVDs, most of that stuff, as he says in his tweet, is just kind of in the background. I actually, as a kid that was obsessed with Star Trek, I didn't really realize it until Voyager came out. And I knew that they were like hidden jokes, but you could never really see what they were. And like the E Entertainment channel in the US did a 1 hour behind the scene of Star Trek Voyager in the pilot. And they had, I think it was Garrett Wine walking around and reading some of the Okudagrams and saying this one says, in space, no one can hear you scream. And this one says this. and they were just saying little in jokes that the art department puts in. And that was really the first time that I had that I had seen or heard exactly what was on an Okudagram.
And it presents a kind of potential issue when you go back and remaster these shows, because obviously something that was not intended to be legible to the viewer originally, there's a danger that suddenly these things become not just visible, but actually distracting potentially. If you go back and remaster those footage. And I'm sure there were examples with the Next Gen Blu-rays of where they actually I'm not sure if that's why, but there were examples of where they changed text that was on the screen because they realised it wasn't, it was going to be legible in a way that it wasn't before, and it wasn't kind of up to scratch one way or another. So there may have been examples of that kind of thing.
I think a lot of it isn't just about recognition, it's also about, there's a level of affection there as well.
Totally.
And the show that I discovered Easter eggs on much more than Star Trek actually was the X-Files. I mean, Mulder and Scully will be walking through a graveyard and all the names on the gravestones will be members of the crew or children of the actors, and almost
that's more maybe.
Not just that. I mean, I mean, there'll be a scene where Scully's acting and Gillian Anderson's sons will be she's yelling at two little boys who are on a bus bothering her, and they're her sons. You know, I mean, there's basically Easter eggs galore in the X-Files, and a lot of stuff to do with numbers. 1013 is a big thing because that's Fox Mulder's birthday, it's Chris Carter's birthday. Obviously, the whole network's called 1013. The production network or whatever. So it's filled with Easter eggs. But I think originally, and I'm pretty sure about this, that when the X-Files was originally being made, there were a few things that they were trying to get the fans to pick up on. But a big percentage of it was the production team just having fun with each other. You know, the writers having fun. I mean, one of the writers was actually dressed up as a monster in one episode, you know, and you don't actually know it's him because he's
the Fluke Man.
The Fluke Man, And so I think sometimes, especially on a show where it's long running, it's serialized, it's over many, many seasons, many, many episodes. And like we learned, you know, from Star Trek Destination that the actors were working these really long hours, you know, and always in each other's company. It does become, I think, obviously there can be problems, you know, but it does become a very family atmosphere. And so I think there probably is a lot of in-jokes, and there is probably a lot of sort of teasing each other and kind of sort of affectionately making fun of each other. And so I sometimes think some of these references to crew and cast in different scenes, whether it's in the art or whether it's actually in the script or whether it's an actor doing something, like I think of Riker playing his trombone, that's because... I mean, is that really an Easter egg? I don't know. But they gave these characters aspects that actually were more about the actors than the actual characters. And I think sometimes it is just because it's like almost like an affectionate gesture. I don't always think it's about the audience. I don't think it's always about pleasing the audience. But because over the years the fan base grows and fans become obsessive, like I don't know, there's three of us actually podcasting about Star Trek, so I shouldn't be rude about that. But fans start obsessively watching things and paying attention to very little details. Then I think they start seeing these as Easter eggs. Whereas originally, I don't know if all of that was always meant for the fans.
No, maybe they were intended for the production team. Or even just, I mean, in some cases, they're kind of, I mean, I was thinking like, there's probably less of these things in the original series, but of course the original series as well had the famous GNDM, you know, on the pipes or whatever. And you could invent something that stood for, but in fact, as far as they were concerned, it stands for goes nowhere, does nothing. You know, which is kind of an in-joke within the design department or whatever. Of course, we should have mentioned when we're talking about, you know, giving recognition to people, the Jeffries tubes, probably the most prominent example of something in Star Trek that's named after someone from the production side of things, and is there as a very explicit homage to that, you know, to that person to have that name. And that name does, of course, occur in dialogue again and again, you know, as a result.
They would name shuttles after people, like the Berman and so yeah, definitely. But I also think that I agree with you, but I also think that there's been in a post kind of, I think, Lost world. You know, you had the X-Files, but I think Lost came in, and every episode of Lost, as an extension of like kind of JJ's personality and the things that he likes to do and things like that, is like full of like, you could just watch that and point it out, like, you know, in jokes. It's full of Easter eggs. It's full of like foreshadowing. It's full of.
But that leads to me to the question, which is like, does it become too much? Because I mean, there has been criticism of like Discovery and Star Trek Beyond that there are too many Easter eggs, and it gets in the way of like an actual realistic plot. Or I'm not saying that about Lost. Although, for the record, what happened with Lost? Anyway, but like, you know,
I don't know. I stopped watching it.
It got lost.
It definitely
got lost.
But you know, like, as in, does that eventually interrupt the viewer's experience of the story? And like, does it become too much?
Well, and I would argue. I mean, I'm not the biggest fan of J.J. Abrams, and part of that is because I think that he, as a director, is so obsessed with referencing other things. And you could say someone like Quentin Tarantino is also so obsessed with referencing other things, but somehow, for me, in his films, it feels like there's enough of an individual thing to kind of... What my issue with J.J. Abrams is I feel like often there's not that much other than that to it. Do you know what I mean? Other than kind of flair. There's a lot of kind of technical flair. There's a lot of kind of sort of fireworks, if you want, cinematic fireworks. But I feel like often his films, to me, feel a little bit hollow. And I think in some ways there is a danger that you have too much of this kind of thing. And actually, with the 47 references, Ron Moore said that on Deep Space Nine, they reached a point where they were doing them so often, they started to pull away from it because the writers started getting kind of sick of it. And they were thinking, is this actually distracting? And, you know, they started deliberately taking 47s out of scripts because they felt that maybe by that point as well, the audience had become aware of it. And once you know, maybe it's okay if a small subsection of the audience is aware of something, but once most of the audience, or at least the fan audience, is aware of it, it's kind of, it's not such a special thing anymore. Somehow the Easter egg is not so unique. I mean, actually, Ready Player One is kind of interesting in that respect because, you know, there you've got this game which is being played by a large percentage of the population of the world. And yet for years and years and years, people are not working out these clues. They're not solving the problems. They're not, and then suddenly one person gets it and then everyone sees where they went and they kind of, they by solving a riddle, in a sense, they've kind of given enough of a clue to everyone else that everyone sort of follows and it becomes less special somehow. Yeah. But that idea of like being the first person to discover one of these things is quite a kind of, that's a kind of moment. And maybe even in your own life, you were saying discovering those hieroglyphics in Indiana Jones. For you personally, that's a moment when that's your first initiation. And even with the 47th, the first time that you notice it, someone might tell you, oh yeah, there's loads of, 47 is mentioned obsessively in Star Trek. And you might think, well, I've been watching Star Trek for years, I've never noticed it. And then, there you go.
I've never noticed it.
But then it's one of those things, once you notice it, you can't not notice it. Yeah. It's like your eyes
now I'm going to see it.
Like, wow, okay, this is... And I personally, I don't know what you guys feel. I feel like sometimes the 47 references are a bit much. And sometimes I'll be watching Star Trek and oh, come on, guys, really, again, we get it. We get the joke. And it can take me out of the moment, if I'm... otherwise dramatically kind of ensconced in the reality of the story, something like that, it's like, was that the right time for a joke? Do you know what I mean? And I suppose some of these other Easter eggs we might talk about, Star Trek can veer from like very serious, straight down the line drama to very playful, kind of silly postmodern comedy, as does the X-Files, totally the same thing. Some episodes totally straight-laced, totally kind of serious. Other episodes basically sending themselves up, very kind of playful. For me, these kind of things, these kind of Easter eggs and so on, they work fine for me in the context of like a silly or a funny episode. Sometimes when they're happening right in the middle of something quite dramatic and serious and intense, I'm a bit more skeptical about it. I'm like, maybe this wasn't the time to basically be subliminally cracking a joke while we're supposed to be wrapped up in this drama,
I mean, I think that I understand what you're saying, and I don't disagree with you. I think anything to an extreme, particularly, you were talking about JJ, you were talking about like Quentin Tarantino. I think anything to an extreme really can take you out of the moment. But at the same time, that's not for the general audience as well, right? And I think that's also, there's certainly a level of rewarding your fans that could, and only, a very small percentage of the population that are watching one thing are going to get it. Yeah. And that's a way, here we are on the 47th podcast talking about Easter eggs and these guys and then the people that made these shows, they put these things in there to drive and to create and to nurture a sense of community of like you guys are in the know.
And you're right, I'm a total hypocrite because I was the one who said it's our 47th episode. We're going to do an episode on in-jokes and Easter eggs, which is absolutely playing into that same idea.
I'm glad you realised it. I'm glad you realised it.
No, you're right. I hold my hands up. It was a cheesy joke along the same lines, I suppose. But one of the things I wanted to talk about, because I think this is an interesting one, and I'd be interested to know what you guys think of this, is we talked a little bit earlier about the TNG technical manual, which is an interesting book. And I don't know about you, I had a copy of that when I was a teenage fan of The Next Generation. I loved that book, even though I didn't understand, 90% of it. It's a very interesting book because on the one hand, it's quite, I was going to say straightforward. I mean, it's more sort of po-faced. It's like ostensibly quite a serious technical document. It explains the science behind all these things in quite sort of serious ways. It's presented like a kind of a manual. It's presented in a kind of serious in-world way. At the same time, it also has silly jokes and ridiculous things. And one of the things that's in there is this idea of citation ops, which of course we never see on screen in The Next Generation. We do get two references to it. We get a reference in Yesterday's Enterprise over the tannoy, which is barely audible. I mean, you talk about things being, not quite visible or not quite audible. Like you wouldn't notice it until someone points it out.
Like Dr. Pulaski.
Exactly. Reports citation ops. And then there's one other episode where Geordi says to someone, "Oh, did you see the dolphins yet?" Which is quite a random thing to say, and for someone who's not familiar with this idea that supposedly there are dolphins and whales on the Enterprise D, even though we never see them. But it's kind of a passing line, maybe you kind of wouldn't notice it. But at the same time, it is, I was kind of thinking, I was looking into this weekend, thinking,
Sorry,
I was sure
why would they ever have dolphins?
Why would they? Well, there you go. And I always assumed it was because Next Gen came out of the success of Star Trek 4, right, which was the film about the whales. And the whole plot of Star Trek 4 hinged on the fact they didn't have whales. We needed whales, otherwise...
So it is an in-joke.
So it is kind of an in-joke, insofar as then they start developing this new series and developing the ship for the new series. And they specifically design a part of the ship that's going to be filled with dolphins and whales. Yeah. And in the technical manual, they have a weird explanation for it. It's not just that you see these little outlines of tiny little whales and dolphins and so on the schematics. They explain that guidance and navigation research. I took this from this article online. If you want to learn about cetacean ops, I can't remember where it was, but it's quite interesting. But it summarises what it says in the technical manual. It's conducted by a cetacean crew of 12 bottlenose dolphins and Pacific bottlenose dolphins who are supervised by 2 whales. Yeah. And according to Rick Sternbach, the idea was never shown on screen since the expense would have been prohibitive, but we did convince the writers to have Geordie ask a visiting official if they ever saw the dolphins. Now, I have to say, I think not only would the cost have been prohibitive, but the viewers of Star Trek The Next Generation would have thought, this is patently ridiculous. You know, why are there dolphins on this ship? It's one thing Picard having a goldfish in his ready room, but whales and dolphins and so on, also, they were not really... Especially if
they've got some sort of weird duty, like a navigation duty,
Well, exactly. It's their job. They're not just there as pets.
We're heading into a whole different type of sci-fi.
What happens when that saucer went down? What happens to the dolphins? Who knows? But the interesting thing...
How do you know it wasn't in the saucer section?
Well, exactly. Well, I assumed they... I said, I need to check. I thought they were in the saucer section. Maybe they weren't. I don't know.
Yeah, maybe
they somebody on Twitter, please let us know where the dolphins were on the Enterprise D.
But cetacean ops is one of those interesting things because I think it's something that obviously most casual viewers of Star Trek would not be aware of, even though literally they may have heard those 2 references. Yeah. But it's something that some fans are fascinated with. You have this idea of Commander Flipper, the kind of cetacean crew member. And it's a bit like the slash fiction. It's almost this whole other world of the Next Generation that we never see, but that we can kind of imagine is going on. And Star Trek Online, I think, they commissioned some designs about, what cetacean ops might have looked like. And, you can see these kind of artist renderings of this kind of deck
full of
dolphins.
Do the dolphins have uniforms?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, I don't know if that's...
Don't be ridiculous.
Don't
be ridiculous.
I've seen cartoons of dolphins with Next Gen uniforms, and I don't know if you ever watched Sequest. There was a dolphin
there was a Sequest.
So it's kind of.
But then the thing is, hold on one second. You're talking about it being ridiculous, but literally we had an entire movie about whales, right?
But they were actual whales.
I was going to say they weren't in space. They were in space.
They were in space.
They were in space.
They traveled through time.
But not on their own initiative.
They didn't fly the ship. We weren't relying on them for navigation.
No.
We were just relying on them to talk to an alien spacecraft and save the Earth. I take it back.
But it's that weird thing, isn't it? But maybe that's partly because, as well, like I was saying, Star Trek 4 is a mad, silly film. I love that film, but it is a very silly romp. Star Trek The Next Generation, although they had comic episodes and so on, is fairly straight-laced as a series on the whole, which is why it feels so bizarre, the idea that secretly there's these whales that no one ever talks about, other than very, brief passing reference. But I'm just kind of interested, do you guys feel that this concept that there are whales on the Enterprise that we just never know about, do you find that charming? Do you find that ridiculous? Do you feel like that you just have to kind of accept that that's not really... It sort of comes into this idea of headcanon or soft canon or whatever. Do you at what level do you believe that there are whales on the Enterprise? Clara.
So, can I just say, I'll try and keep this as brief as possible. I have a bugbear with things that take you out of the narrative world that you're supposed to be viewing. So, and Lost is a prime example of this. In one of the first episodes, there was a polar bear on the island, and they never explained that polar bear again. Now, the thing is, if something's very strange, doesn't fit into the into sort of the real world example on the show. Okay, so Star Trek itself is obviously a fantasy, right? It's a fiction. We all know that.
What?
We're not heading towards that future? First Contact, any day.
Yeah.
But the way it's explained in the series is that although the idea of warp speed seems kind of crazy, it's explained with, science fiction, technology, technobabble. Everything is kind of explained as realistic in that world, in that narrative. But if the Enterprise flying through space came across the giant killer rabbit from Monty Python. And, Picard was like, I can sing this rabbit to sleep. And he started singing. The whole narrative sort of realistic aspect of that world would break down, and the audience would be like, what? Like, you're taken out of the actual story. You're taken out of the world. And Lost is a prime example of that. Like, you were suddenly taken off the island. You were like, what is a polar bear doing there? And then they never accurately explained it. So it has to be a very good explanation for that.
Yes, I agree. And like I said, I stopped watching Lost, so I sort of assumed
navigating dolphins is too far.
Explained. Yeah, no, I think that's fair.
I'm in the middle because
the polar bear maybe was explained at some point.
No, they do explain it, like they were doing tests later, and I'm sure somebody on Twitter will.
Okay, so the Ferengi are crazy. It's a crazy idea, right? Like, as a species, they're very strange looking. It's kind of inconceivable that they would exist. We have no actual real life examples of Ferengi, but their society and their world and them as aliens are so well drawn in the Star Trek universe. They make perfect sense in the Star Trek universe. But if you took the Ferengi out of the Star Trek universe and you stuck the Ferengi in Game of Thrones, for instance, you'd be like...
Or EastEnders.
What? Or EastEnders. Exactly.
I'd watch that. I'd watch that.
It has to make narrative sense in the world it's in. And I'm sorry, navigating dolphins in Star Trek uniforms in a hidden part of the Enterprise does not make narrative sense.
See, I'm in the middle here because I actually find that stuff really charming, right? Okay. I agree with you. I don't like, you're watching something like Duet and you don't want to be like, take it out of the narrative. Like you don't, right? You're watching, the rescue of best of both worlds that you don't want to be taking out of the narrative. However, I think that they're in on the joke. The writers and the producers are in on a lot of these jokes. They're not going to show you the real reason they didn't show you the dolphins and the whales in the Enterprise D is not because they didn't have the budget. I'm sure they didn't have the budget, but they would never have shown you that for all the reasons that you said it, right? Even though there's a lot of really ridiculous things, particularly in the original series and in early TNG, that are absolutely ridiculous, and they wouldn't show that to you now. But I actually think that the in-jokes are really charming. So like one of my favorite things in the world is when they, on DS9, which I think is actually the king in terms of all, Discovery is probably going to surpass it, but like, the kind of the 80s and 90s Trek, DS9 is definitely the king of those kind of in-jokes. And one of my favorite things in the world is when Garrick is drinking Earl Grey and he's like, I like to show Earl, that Earl Grey, a thing or two, Mr. Earl Grey. So they do all these like really self-deprecating kind of like referencing other Treks. But one of the things that I love is when they talk about like Captain Baudet or, Lieutenant Villix Pran, and you never see them, but every single time they talk about them, they get more and more, like within the reality of Star Trek, they still get more and more. Yes. They're like, oh, in one episode he's talking about this, and then all of a sudden he's got a transparent skull. Villix Pran is like shedding and then having 12 kids. And
I love that. That's true. And it's that kind of playfulness of... And it's absolutely like, and only the fans who are recognizing this is the same person who keeps coming up are going to be aware of that. Yeah. Another one that I quite like in Enterprise, Enterprise I think is probably one of the least playful of the Star Trek series in some ways. It's quite stretched down the line. But I like the idea of this character of Chef who's never, who's never seen. Yeah. And then finally in the very final episode, not that there are many redeeming features to that episode, but we do get, this kind of jokey solution to the problem that suddenly Riker is Chef. Obviously that's not possible that Riker is really Chef, but at the same time, I don't know, it's quite nice. It reminds me of in Frasier, the character of Maris,
you never meet her.
Who you never meet. But because you never meet her, because no actress could play the character that's been described, because she has such a kind of larger than life personality off screen. Yeah. No one could kind of match that. And in some ways, by having a character like that, you can really play with who this person is. You're sort of playing with the audience because you're kind of acknowledging, this is silly, this is not really realistic. But at the same time, you can kind of build them up into this really kind of over-the-top level. You get the same thing, weirdly, with Morn, who I think is another... Morn is a fantastic character who is basically one in-joke. First of all, because he's an anagram of Norm. Yeah. Cheers. So he's like, his name is a joke, and his entire existence within Deep Space Nine is a reference to another TV show. Yeah. But then also because of the fact, first of all, the fact he never speaks, which is funny in itself. And then the fact that not only does he never speak, because obviously the guy was an extra and he wasn't paid to speak, but that they make jokes about how he never shuts up. They make jokes about, how talkative he is. So there's this
what
kind
a
of
fighter
weird joke.
He is.
Exactly.
Yeah,
and when you get to Who Mourns for Morn, which is kind of almost an in-joke about an in-joke, because the entire episode is effectively a joke about the fact that they have this character who is sort of sort of real on one level and sort of a kind of construct that the audience recognises as really a real person. He's kind of, it gets bigger and bigger. So when they find out that Morn has died, you get this kind of multiplication of implausible, ridiculous stories about him. So you find out that he used to spar with Worf. So suddenly this guy who was like propping up the bar and, quite sort of big and burly and slow and lazy looking was apparently this brilliant fighter. Then you find out Jadzia Dax had an unrequited crush on him and Morn wasn't interested in her. And it just sort of gets more and more and more ridiculous. But there's this kind of, it's kind of just, it's a game basically. It's sort of saying to the viewer, this character is not a real person. This character is kind of a joke. But at the same time, you can love them. We love Morn. Morn is a great character. So you can kind of, you can sort of play with that. And then another in-joke, which actually I had never even realised until I put this post on the Babel conference, someone pointed out, in the episode Who Mourns for Morn, the guy, when Morn has died, and Quark has this idea, keep Morn's seat warm, the guy who moves forward to keep Morn's seat warm, who's a random Bajoran, is actually the same actor who plays Morn, just without makeup and everything. So he's still taking up the seat. So again, there's kind of like an in-joke within an in-joke about an in-joke.
But see, like here we are talking about this, right? And we get, it's charming and it's fun. And so like, I understand exactly what you're saying. I don't disagree with you at all. I do think that there are moments when when something can take you out of the world and you're into it, and that is very jarring. But I also think that like actually Who Mourns for Morn is that perfect example of it being really charming. And here, obviously the audience can't, the two people that listen to this or whatever it is, like, are. What
are you saying about our listeners?
No, I'm sure it's, I'm sorry, I meant 2 million. Here we are like smiling about it. And it is, and I do think that actually when it's done well like that, it's really charming. And I think it's a wink to us, like, and who are here 20 years later talking about it. Yeah. That like, that it's a wink to us to say, you guys are in on it.
Yeah. Yeah. No, absolutely. I think that's true. And I think Morn always, some people don't like. I always quite enjoyed the episode Who Mourns for Morn.
I love that episode.
And I think DS9 does do these kind of episodes that kind of veer off in a sort of weird direction, and they kind of handle it very well because they have the character comedy down so well in that show.
Another, just to like really quickly, is in Dogs of War, when Quark literally verbatim does the Picard speech, but it's like absolutely, it's amazing, but it's absolutely ridiculous, right? Yeah. And that is a complete in-joke because if you're not watching if you haven't watched First Contact, which I don't know why you're watching the DS9 at that point if you haven't watched First Contact, but like it is like, also kind of poking fun. And because they were the redheaded stepchild of Star Trek, as Ira Burr always likes to point out, they did make all like kind of these jabs at like.
It's sort of poking fun at the pomposity of Next Gen as well, because I think that's part of it. Yeah. So you've got Quark, Quark, who is this kind of Ferengi character, who's this kind of wretch. He's like the anti-Picard.
Exactly.
Picard is all about selflessness and self-sacrifice and altruism and nobility and doing the right thing. And, we don't need money anymore and all of this sort of thing. Quark is, venal and self-serving and kind of, out for a quick buck and everything. And yet he's literally quoting, his, the line must be drawn here, this far, no further. Which is also such an un-Quark thing to say.
Exactly.
And the way it's shot as well, I was watching that scene today, it's shot in this very kind of dramatic way, with him like at the centre stage declaiming this speech. It's hilarious.
Direct that episode.
Did he? Right, I think he did. I think he did. But he had it as well with in the cards. They played that joke previously, again with First Contact. I think First Contact is a very quotable film. Yeah. They had that joke because you've got this argument between Jake and Nog about Jake is saying, will you buy this, will you bid on this card for my dad? And Nog's like, well, why don't you bid on it? And he's like, well, I don't have any money. And he basically just gives, he literally gives again verbatim Picard's speech from First Contact to Lily. But in this context, it's sort of sent up because Nog is like, well, that's ridiculous. Yeah. Get your own money, basically.
But so that's why Deep Space Nine was the king of this, right?
Exactly.
And I think
like pricking the
totally the ridiculous of like Star Trek and the fact that TNG, which by the way, I love TNG, right? Like who doesn't? But like it is TNG was so kind of in so many ways like so strict and so like Picard, exactly. And DS9 is not, and proper and noble, and like, and that's the way it should be. And it was, and DS9 is anything but. But then you have scenes like where Worf says to Jadzia in the Runabout, I don't remember what episode it is, where he's like, on the Enterprise, that was considered to be quite fun. And she's like, well, that must have been a one boring ship, those things are amazing.
And with Next Generation, you find that very much it's like characters from other series go into Next Generation, I'm thinking of like unification, isn't there the episode where Leonard McCoy pays a visit to whereas in Deep Space Nine they travel back to the original series, don't they? In that episode, is it
Trials and Tribulations?
And there's lots of in-jokes about doesn't Jadzia say something funny about what she's wearing? And referencing that Spock's so attractive, which is kind of an in-joke to the fact that half the women on the original series were in love with Spock. And then
she married Spock's son.
Yeah, she married Spock's son. Yeah. That's like a real world.
Yeah, that's like a weird
Easter egg.
I wonder if they said that at the wedding. In a weird time travel, you hit on your dad,
and then there's sort of references to how the Klingons look different then, and that sort of thing. Yeah. So I feel like Deep Space Nine isn't afraid to kind of share itself more.
Yeah. Deep Space Nine could handle it, I think. And that's why I've always thought the way exactly that line about the Klingons, it's something we don't talk about. Yeah. That was the DS9 approach. It's coy, it's playful, it's kind of we know what's really going on. We'll make a joke about it and deflect it. Whereas then you get an Enterprise, a serious effort to really explain it all. And this kind of, I suppose this was Brandon Braga used to complain about the continuity pornographers when he was writing Enterprise, this kind of obsession with continuity. But you do get in that storyline in Enterprise. And then, of course, they've shot themselves in the foot because then you get to Discovery where they decide to change it all again. Yeah. And they're like, what are they going to do? And I know they're all this thing about hair and they cut their hair, they grow their hair, all this business. But, basically we know they want them to look different. They want to redefine the look. They've done that with various other species along the way,
with Klingons themselves.
Exactly.
Easter eggs aren't always designed to explain things, are they? I mean, that's the thing. Sometimes Easter eggs or references are actually, like you said, charming in-jokes or sort of weird, bizarre little ideas that pop up, like the number 47, just to intrigue the audience or to please the people making the show. And sometimes over-explaining things for the sake of canon, like you say, can lead to something
funny.
It's
not funny.
Fairly dry.
Whereas Trials and Tribulations does it in a way that is funny. And it kind of, I suppose, it sort of vaguely gives an in-universe non-explanation. At least, I suppose that's the thing, it acknowledges it. It acknowledges the past and the history and makes a joke out of it rather than trying to kind of tie it all in and make it all fit perfectly and make perfect sense of it.
So I like Enterprise. I'm never going to sit there and crap on Enterprise necessarily. I enjoy Enterprise. It's not my favorite, but I enjoy it. But that scene, this is the difference. That one scene in that one episode of Deep Space Nine has more charm, is infinitely more quotable, and I will go back to that. It there doesn't even compare to 3 episodes where they literally brought back Brent Spiner, right? And those are not bad episodes, but it's infinitely forgettable. Yeah. In compared to that one little scene. Yeah. And I think and I think it goes to show you the power of them kind of acknowledging to the audience that we get it. And it was because in the 60s, they couldn't do this kind of makeup and this was a low budget show. And now this show, we can't do all these things, but who cares?
Yeah. And there is, a lot of these in-jokes are very much directed at addressing kind of real world issues that were circulating around Star Trek and to kind of acknowledging that. One of the other ones that I think is quite interesting is, say, in Star Trek 5, you've got that line, not in front of the Klingons. Yeah. And there's this kind of, it's a tease, basically, isn't it? Because and that line would not exist if it weren't for the slash fiction, this kind of idea of Kirk and Spock as lovers and so on. Which obviously Star Trek is never going to make real because that's not real in the context of the kind of canonical Star Trek universe. But they can tease it by having a line like that, which is just slightly flirting with that idea. Yeah. And you get it again in Enterprise, actually. Look, this is really, these are the redeeming features of These Are the Voyages, which is not a great episode by any stretch. And I don't know if this was in the script, I don't know if it's deliberate or whatever, but the way that episode is edited, there's a moment where there was this whole sort of kerfuffle about whether Reed was going to be a gay character. And if you watch the Enterprise Blu-rays, you'll see, the interesting conversations that went on around that particular topic and the views that people had about it. But I love the fact that in that final episode of Enterprise, because they have those interviews where Riker is interviewing different people and he's interviewing Reed and then he asks the question, and were you attracted to Trip? And then it cuts and it turns out he's actually interviewing Hoshi, I think. Yeah. But it's a very playful, it's just this kind of thing where for a split second, it seems like he's implying that, Reed is a gay character. And then, of course, this being Star Trek in the, whatever it was, 2000s, they weren't going to go there. They didn't go there. Yeah. But they did seed that tiny little
Yeah, like wink to the audience.
Joke. It's exactly. It's a wink to the audience. Yeah, we know that, there were some people who thought this was going to be a gay character, and there was a kind
I think there's an outtake where it's a bit more explicit, and I think the actor sort of responds like, I don't know, I could be wrong. I think if you look up Enterprise outtakes, I think you will find an outtake from that very scene where, like, Jonathan Frakes actually says something like, were you attracted to him or something?
Right.
And the other actor kind of basically swears at him or something. So I think, YouTube outtakes as well.
Wow, okay. Well, we'll have to look up that
episode. And there's a story. but there's a real story. We were living here. I was in London going to LSE at the time, and I couldn't get Enterprise in real time. So I used to try to download it, however I could get it. And that episode was just not available. I couldn't find it anywhere.
Right.
Then I moved back to the US, and it wasn't available on DVD. It wasn't on demand or anything. And then by that point, all of the backlash for the episode was everywhere.
Right.
I have seen every episode of Star Trek, minus the animated series. I've seen a few. Some of them literally dozens, if not hundreds of times. And that is the one episode I've never seen.
Well, that is interesting. I mean, it's a good choice, I'd say. This is going to be one.
So maybe we should watch it live and we can react live.
Carlos live.
I think it's interesting that you mentioned the animated series, because the animated series is almost an in-joke within the Star Trek universe in itself, because it skirts this line of whether it's canon or not.
Yeah.
When we were at Destination Star Trek, I bought, Clara was with me, I bought a Tribble for my son Leo, but I also bought a glommer. And a glommer is you won't know that, maybe you will if you've seen 1 or 2 episodes. A glommer is the animal that eats Tribbles, basically.
I did.
Part of the appeal, I think, for me of buying the glommer is this is something that, does it exist within Star Trek or not? Because it's kind of semi-canonical. It's sort of slightly ambiguous. And they're selling this creature. And it's yes, it is kind of in Star Trek. It's in the animated series. But at the same time, did those stories, did these things really, in quote marks, did this really happen? And I think when you see things from the animated series being brought into the kind of live action series, and you got it, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think in Discovery, one of the names of those captains that Saru brought up was Robert April, who, as far as I know, was only ever mentioned in the animated series. Is that right?
No, I think there is something in the original series, because I remember.
Hasn't been mentioned.
Yeah, because and he's supposed to look like Gene Roddenberry, and so there's a picture of Gene Roddenberry, at least in the Star Trek Encyclopedia, talking about Michael Kuda.
No, but that was in the encyclopedia. I don't think.
I think the name is mentioned.
I think the name is April, that he's the first captain of the Enterprise.
Okay,
but we can pretend.
It's a reference
one way or another. Anyway, anything that essentially comes from the animated series and is then referenced in any way in later Star Trek is almost an Easter egg in itself, because it's like saying, hey, we saw this wacky cartoon and we're pretending that was real as well, when, patently it was a cartoon. Yeah. And it's that kind of weird, again, sort of skirting the line of, what reality are we in right now? What's real anyway anymore?
I was thinking about the show the other day and in preparation for this, because obviously they just announced last month Lower Decks, and that's going to be, it has a 2-season, at minimum of a 2-season commitment on CBS All Access, and it's going to be animated. And it sounds like, especially the people that are bringing in, it will have a slight kind of comedic, slant to it. And who knows, it'll be slapstick. Who knows what it's going to be like, or who knows what it's going to look like. But then all of a sudden, is it going to be canon?
Right.
And does it matter? I actually don't ever think of the animated series as canon. I personally don't think of it as canon. I am not an orthodox when it comes to canon or anything like that. But then all of a sudden, Star Trek 09, which I adore. I love Star Trek 09. Right. To me, it's almost a perfect movie in many respects. And that can be the topic of another. And I hate Into Darkness as much as I love 09. Okay. That's a whole other topic. But I mean, I remember when they were making it yesteryear, that episode in the animated series, the one episode of the animated series that I think twice, was a huge influence for the Spock storyline. Yeah. So, okay, you can argue, it's not canon, but it played a huge influence in,
and even the design and so on.
Yeah, and the design and
Yeah, it's true.
See, I just think of everything as canon. I just take it all and put it all together, except for the dolphins.
The slash fiction.
Okay, maybe not the slash fiction, but because I spent a good portion of my childhood reading Star Trek books.
Right.
And the original novels of the original series are not considered canon.
Yeah.
So there's all these stories about Kirk and Spock doing all these non-sexual things, fun things going around the universe, and none of those are considered canon. So, and even like the post-Voyager novels aren't considered canon, but I read all of that stuff and really enjoyed it. So for me, canon isn't such an issue for me. It's kind of the whole part and parcel of the fact that it's science fiction. You can just throw everything in it together, unless it's set in a real-world context, like something like the X-Files, in which I kind of get a little bit freaked out when things start going crazy. But like, do you see what I'm saying? Like, Star Trek's such a big franchise. There's so much, and there's so many different versions, so many different series, and there's also alternate universes and all that sort of thing. But I think the more the merrier. I guess if you have different types of different formats, so something's animated and something's like live action, it's hard for people to reconcile it in their heads, I suppose.
One thing that I was kind of interested in about this subject is, and I mean, you know, we're not going to get through we've made lists of like hundreds of in-jokes and Easter eggs and so on. We're not going to get through all of them. I'm just going to whiz through a few of my favourite ones we haven't talked about briefly. One of the ones I loved was Tasha Yar's Wave Goodbye. I mean, that's one that I only realised when the TNG Blu-rays, I think, came out. People started pointing out that Denise Crosby actually waves goodbye to the show, not in her final episode, but in her final scene that was filmed. It's in the background. You can see her waving goodbye. You know, I love
that was
all
a
the
dumb
kind of
mistake.
references. Right. Well, no one noticed. I know, but I love it. I think for me, that's quite charming. That's quite nice. I love the episode Tinker Tenor Dr. Spy, which is an episode that is just infused with references to previous Star Trek. You know, you start off with a scene which is kind of a rip-off of Sarek, where Tuvok is weeping at the opera. You've got, the Doctor has to kind of basically become Spock in the Wrath of Khan, he thinks, and go into the warp core. You've got this kind of playful idea that's kind of constantly playing with Star Trek's own history. You've got, you talked about 2009. 2009 has that nice joke about Admiral Archer's Beagle. By the time you get to Beyond, there's kind of such a web of references to previous Star Trek. It is this kind of anniversary film, because it was for the 50th, and we saw the same thing with Skyfall, which you and I were talking about at Destination Star Trek, Carlos, about, this idea of kind of bringing in all these kind of references, bringing in all these little nuggets, all these Easter eggs and so on. But one of the interesting things I thought that Clara asked when we were preparing for this episode was sort of along the lines of, when does an Easter egg become more than an Easter egg? When does it become more than that? And a lot of these things that we talked about, they are quite flippant. They are quite kind of, they're little cheesy jokes. They're little kind of in-jokes. They're little asides almost to the audience. The example for me that works, that I think you could argue is, in a sense, an Easter egg, but a rather magnificent sort of Fabergé Easter egg, is the episode Lethe. And in Discovery, that was the episode that really made me take that show seriously. And it's an interesting one because, it is kind of going back and sort of delving into this literally 50-year-old mystery that's been hanging around in Star Trek and filling in a little bit of continuity in this way. And it is absolutely, on one level, it has all of that kind of Easter egg equality. It's kind of going into something quite minute and quite small and kind of explaining it, giving a little bit of extra context, giving a little bit of extra a little bit of extra information to put in that moment. And I thought it was wonderful. It's like it's a real treat for the fans. I mean, they often talk about These Are the Voyages, which, you fortunately haven't seen, Carlos, was intended allegedly as a love letter to the fans. The fans rejected it. They ghosted
Return to sender.
Exactly, return to sender, But I mean, I think Lethe is one of those things where it's quite bold. It does something that I certainly wasn't expecting going into Discovery, to get an explanation for, what was going on with Sarek and Spock and so on. But it does it in such an effective, successful, sort of jaw-dropping way. I mean, I've talked about this before. I literally gasped when I watched that episode because I was just like, it's mind-boggling.
Ballsy too.
Exactly, really ballsy. But it is, on one level, for the fans. That is like fan service of the most... I'm mixing my metaphors. That's like fan silver service. That's not just like cheap fan service. Whereas I think when we talk about fan service, a lot of people say, they love In a Mirror Darkly. I do not love In a Mirror Darkly personally. I think that's fan service of a slightly junk food kind of variety. But I think Lethe is just...
the Blumenthal, like Heston Blumenthal version.
Exactly. It's like the haute cuisine of fan service.
I love that episode, by the way. It's by far, literally my favorite episode of Discovery to date. It is, I think that episode is an absolute kind of masterpiece in many respects, because I think, one, it's really ballsy. It's like episode 6 of Discovery, if I'm not mistaken. Because they play not just with like Star Trek lore, like they play with Spock, like early. But not only do they do it, they did it, in my opinion, and I would argue they do it perfectly.
Yeah.
Like, it complicates the character of Sarek.
Yeah.
It makes the character of Michael all of a sudden infinitely more interesting, as in relationship to both Sarek and Spock. And I just think that that's a Grand Slam episode for me. It is
and it's believable. I think that's
it's totally believable.
It feels totally believable. It makes total psychological sense. So it's not like, a lot of these Easter eggs, they're demanding that you suspend your disbelief. In a sense, like something like Morn is presenting something that is not believable.
Yeah.
The idea that he's fighting with Worf on the holosuite or whatever. But yeah, what Lethe manages to do is kind of almost play the same game, but do it in a way that is totally credible and totally believable. And you're like, oh my God, how do we not see this for 50 years? Yeah. This makes so much sense.
What's amazing about that is that Sarek, obviously turns one child away in favor of another child, and that's the child that he favors then, turns his back on him, and it's just like an amazing family fuck up on such a massive scale.
And it's led to memes. If you go on the internet, there's that picture of Sarek looking depressed, wearing a t-shirt saying "I give up" at a party, holding balloons, and it's like one of my two of my children joined Starfleet, and one of my children joined a cult. I give up. None of them went to the Science Academy. The Vulcan Science Academy.
But he wasn't. Was he ever in the Science Academy? I don't know. He was a
but a Vulcan can dream.
I know.
What's amazing is that this is a whole other topic, but I don't understand. We talk about continuity and people who are obsessed with continuity.
Yeah.
People are like, well, we didn't know. How can we have Michael be part of the family? And you're like, yeah, but
they're a weird family.
They're a weird family. Cybok. you didn't they even address it in the movie. They're like, I didn't know you had a brother. I know everything about you. And you're like.
Weirdly, Gene Roddenberry claims that Star Trek V was non-canonical. That it was, it was basically like the animated series. It never really happened. So there was that kind of idea, is Cybok, is Cybok real?
Yeah, but we don't have everything explained for us about every character in Star Trek, because that's not how television entertainment works. And the viewer doesn't want huge amounts of exposition. We don't want Sarek to stand there and deliver a long family history in verbal form, So it's not that we don't necessarily, that Michael never existed. It's just Spock never mentioned her while we were watching. Do you know what I mean? It's not impossible that he wouldn't have talked about her in some other context.
I did feel, I have to say, when they announced Discovery and they announced that she was going to be Spock's foster sister or whatever, I was a bit like, come on, because there is this sort of question, not just what's possible, but what's sort of plausible. And kind of play, there is a kind of contract between the writers and the producers and the audience, and you kind of buy into. And I suppose what's charming about these Easter eggs is they slightly, there's a kind of tension there, because they are toying with the boundary between what's real and what's fiction, if you know what I mean, by kind of acknowledging these moments where there's it's kind of porous, that barrier, something can kind of seep through from the real world into the fictional world and so on. I just wanted to ask Carlos before we go, you loved Lethe, you loved the 2009 movie. Star Trek Into Darkness, arguably, is replete with Easter eggs for the right 100%.
But they're shitty Easter eggs. I would talk about them being charming. I think they've gone. Those Easter eggs have gone. Yeah, exactly. They've gone bad. They've been let out in the garden. They've been in the garden for months.
Yeah. But the difference with Into Darkness is or with Lethe, they're not claiming that Spock is a different person, or a different character. They're just adding more clarification or more characters to the Spock story arc, right? Whereas with Into Darkness, they fundamentally changed the characters, which is why it all had to become a Kelvin timeline and a completely different, I guess an alternate universe or something. But they changed the characters. They made Kirk do an action. At the very end, they say, Kirk is this is what you would have done, and Spock is this is what this is what you would have done. So they're swapping roles.
I think it's also.
Do you see what I'm saying? It's actually changing who the person is after 50 years of that character being like that.
You see, I think it's also this kind of idea of how seriously do you take it? And a lot of these Easter eggs that we talked about, they're kind of flippant. They're kind of cheap jokes, and you accept the cheap joke if it's funny and if it's in the context of something that is fun and entertaining. Something like Lethe, I think, is unusual because it's not a cheap joke at all. It's actually taking this really seriously, and you're impressed by it, and you kind of are like, yeah, okay, I buy that, that's fine. I think Into Darkness fails on that level because it's taking something which is quite serious. You know, the Wrath of Khan is a moment, like in all of Star Trek, kind of high watermark of drama. And it's kind of turning it into, it's almost turning it into a meme. It's saying like, we can borrow this, we can take this, we can, you know, rip this apart and do something with it, and you'll love it because it's like this other thing you love. It's like, and it's just like, don't you get it? It's exactly that kind of JJ. For me, it's the kind of worst example of that kind of J.J. Abrams, like magpie-like mentality of like, I'm going to borrow this and I'm going to take this and I'm going to kind of cobble it all together. And you're just like, you do not understand why it works in the first place. It's like the idea
in an alternate universe, like I might be sitting on that side of the table and you might be sitting on this side of the table. But okay, so maybe we're sitting on different sides of the table, but we wouldn't be each other. Do you know what I mean? Like I wouldn't be the Clara version of Duncan, and Duncan would be the, you know,
that would be an awesome episode.
Do you know what I mean? Like,
we'll have to do that one.
You see what I'm saying? Like, I mean, you know, you don't fundamentally change who you are, and the sacrifice in the Wrath of Khan was fundamentally a decision or a choice that was very much determined by Spock's personality. Yes. It's not like you suddenly, you know, I mean, do something like, we might have this podcast in a different location, in a different timeline, but, you know, we wouldn't be, I don't know, standing on our heads or something. Or make, this is a bad example. But you see what I'm saying? Like, you wouldn't make completely different choices. But we wouldn't be talking about some inferior sci-fi series.
It's true. That very interchangeability of those characters, I suppose, suggests something about how non-grounded that approach to storytelling is somehow. Maybe. Do you know what I mean? This idea that, Kirk can do the Spock thing and Spock can do the Kirk thing, and it's kind of like...
It was just cheap and badly done. That's the problem with me. The thing is that... So, again, my love for 09 knows no bounds, right? But what drives me crazy about Into Darkness is that they earned, at least in my opinion, with 09, the ability to play around in that world. And they not only earned it, but they could do anything, because now it's like in yesterday's Enterprise. It's like if we would have followed that storyline. This is now an alternate. It had its origins in the Prime universe, which is amazing, but now it's its own new thing, and everything's up in the air, right? But my issue is that they had the entire playground to play in, and they choose to remake Wrath of Khan poorly. And that to me is that it's just unforgivable. Like, I don't understand why they did it.
Because it breaks that contract, I think, between the writers and the viewers. And that's, you know, when we talk about fan service, I suppose that is part of it. And, you know, I mentioned Brannon Braga saying, you know, about these fans who are continuity pornographers, and they're breathing down my neck, and I can't write because these fans are telling me what they want and what they don't want, and so on. And obviously there is always that kind of slightly complex relationship between the writers who are trying to do new things or do interesting things, and the fans who maybe want them to do certain things that aren't, you know, they may not be on the same page. But I suppose maybe where these Easter eggs can work is that they are a sort of gift, I suppose, on one level, and they're an expression of trust, and they're an expression of kind of that kind of easygoing, I don't know, affection, whether it's affection for the show itself or affection between the writers and the fans or whatever. But it's interesting that, Carlos, you pointed out that Deep Space Nine is the show that does it the best. And in some ways, of course, Deep Space Nine was the show that wasn't always loved by the fans. You know what I mean? It was the middle child. But maybe they felt that, like, the people who got it. You know what I mean? And they didn't really care whether the people who only like Next Gen came on board or whatever. Hence, you do get that kind of, you know, slight prodding now and then. But, you know, but kind of Next Gen pomposity or whatever.
But this is what I'm about to say is not to derail this conversation, but like definitely a topic for another podcast. But I just finished reading A View from the Bridge, which is Nicholas Meyer's kind of memoirs about Hollywood. I don't know if you guys have read it. I could not recommend it enough. It was phenomenal, right? Like really, even if you would love it if you didn't even like Star Trek, because it's just such an amazing view into filmmaking in the 70s and 80s and early 90s. And what he made, arguably, probably, the best Star Trek movie ever made, Star Trek II: Wrath of Khan, and then the 3 best, by far, original series movies. And he did it, and he talks about it, how he just looked at Star Trek and was like, I don't care what came before me. I'm gonna do everything that I want. So I think Star Trek can sometimes works best when there is that tension of like that Gene Roddenberry is like, oh, we're like this, and then someone else, it takes like a Harvey Bennett and a Nicholas Meyer and say, yeah, I love all your jokes and like what you created before. but actually I'm going to do exactly what I want.
Yeah.
And
Ira Stephen Bear.
Exactly.
He loved the original series, but wanted to do his own thing. Didn't want to do more next gen.
Right. And Star Trek, I think, works best when like there is a tension between someone's artistic vision and it's trying to pull away ironically, from what Gene Roddenberry's original vision.
Well, it's about exploring new worlds, right? So you can't explore new worlds if you just sort of keep repeating the same plot over and over and over again. And so Star Trek has to be different from one series to the next because, like, that's what the whole series is about. I mean, apart from a utopian vision of the future, it is about going out and finding new things and discovering new things and new concepts. So that has to happen with new series. And so that's why I'm sometimes surprised when there's like a section of fans who are like, this is not real Star Trek. I'm like, I don't know how you can say that when every series is different.
You just
don't watch
the Easter eggs, maybe the Easter eggs. The interesting is, I feel like with Discovery, part of the function, because Discovery did have quite a lot of Easter eggs going back to previous Star Trek in there. And I think a lot of them were partly a way of sort of staking a claim. Almost. They were saying this is the same universe. And also because there was this thing of like, who are these people? These guys haven't written Star Trek before. These aren't the real Star Trek writers. They don't know Star Trek. They were partly a way of kind of like, flashing your Star Trek ID and saying, we've seen all this, we know what we're talking about. And, arguably maybe with Beyond as well. I mean, aside from the 50th thing, having Simon Pegg on board, who was a big Star Trek fan originally, which J.J. Abrams certainly was not, maybe that was a way of kind of saying, hi, I get it, I can throw in
but then
the odd joke,
once you've done
prove my credentials almost.
And once you've done the Easter eggs and the references back, then I think, to establish that you are in the same universe and it is Star Trek and they are fans, then you can go and do something completely amazing and new. And I wonder if the second series of Discovery is going to be like that.
Or will
completely
it just be,
out there? I'm hoping it's going to be completely different.
Well, before we go, Carlos, let me ask you where our listeners can find you online if they want to chat to you more about Star Trek and make their defense of Star Trek Into Darkness and
bring it. I'm really active on Twitter, which is how we met, and so it's at Double Mac with 2 C's at the end because I really, aside from Star Trek, my other great love is coffee, and so I drink a lot of double macchiatos, and that's where Double Mac comes from. I'm much more Janeway than Picard when it comes to my drinks of choice.
I'll have to have you on for a debate about the merits of Janeway's coffee versus Picard's Earl Grey tea.
There's no question. We just did the podcast right now. Like, the coffee's infinitely better. Podcast over.
Fair enough. Well, apparently Patrick Stewart even hates Earl Grey tea.
There
you go. Anyway, it's been great having you on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for coming. Well, it's been fun talking about Easter eggs and in-jokes and the numerous iterations of the number 47 in the Star Trek universe. But that's not the only thing we've been talking about on Trek FM this week. So here's a listen to what else you might have missed elsewhere on the network.
Previously on Trek.fm, the 602 Club.
Robert the Bruce isn't sort of one of these stories that we kind of get told a lot really in school, and it's kind of funny that you're talking about that you've just read this kind of book about, my first king, as it essentially were, whereas at school I spent a year learning about American history and kind of the rise to American Civil War as Civil War over. Like, there never is much kind of conversation about kind of Scottish history, right, with certain things like the Jacobites and perhaps, the classic world wars, for example. So, like, it's really interesting to almost have this discussion.
Melodic Treks.
I think it's notes and the combinations that they use. So they will use dissonance, so notes that don't really clash and don't really go against each other, and they'll use minor chords. They'll use diminished chords because those sound, the saddest, the most frightening. They'll use those. Maybe an augmented chord here and there.
Literary Treks.
Data should have been XO half a decade ago. He should have been first officer on this ship. I have cost him years in his career because I didn't get out of his way, because I was too comfortable, because I didn't want to shake up my life, because I was scared. He says, well, I'm done being scared. I'm done being comfortable. I'm taking command of the Titan. That's the moment Riker says, I got to wake up. My life could end tomorrow. I need to do more. I need to be more.
Warp 5. Okay, so Frankenstein kills a couple people, right? Kills an old man, kills an old woman, scares a bunch of people, goes on the run, scares some girl guides. right?
Yeah, some Girl Scout guides. Yep.
Girl Scout guides, take some cookies.
Yeah.
And that's what else is happening on Trek.fm.
Check out all these shows and join the conversation about your favourite corner of the Star Trek universe and beyond. You'll find us wherever you get your podcasts. If you're an Apple user, be sure to hit the subscribe button in Apple Podcasts on iPhone, iPad, or Apple TV, or the desktop iTunes app to get the latest episodes as soon as they are published.
And please leave us a star rating and a written review. If you're not an Apple user, we've got you covered as well. You can find our shows on Google Play Music, Stitcher, TuneIn, Spreaker, SoundCloud, Windows Phone, in most third-party apps, and you can stream and download the MP3 file from our website or grab the RSS link.
We'd love to hear your thoughts on today's show, and there are many ways for you to do that. The best place is to join the larger conversation on the Babel Conference, our listeners group on Facebook. Just type in Babel, B-A-B-E-L, into the search field on Facebook, and it should come right up.
If you'd like to send us an email, you can use the form on our website at trek.fm/contact. Choose to send to a show and select Primitive Culture. That'll come right to us. You can also find the network on Twitter at TrekFM and on Facebook at facebook.com/TrekFM.
Primitive Culture is brought to you by Duncan Barrett and Clara Cook. You can find Duncan Barrett on Twitter at Barrett's Books. You can find Clara on Twitter at ClaraJeanMC.
If you'd like to help us keep all our shows coming to you each week, you can become a patron of the network on Patreon. Visit patreon.com/TrekFM. That's patreon.com/TrekFM to get all the details.
Perks include early access to episodes, exclusive content, producer credits, and more, available through our special patrons website, Patron Zone. It requires a great deal of money to produce, host, and distribute these shows each month. We really appreciate any support you can give us, and hope you'll join the team. Again, you'll find all the details at patreon.com/TrekFM.
We'd like to take this opportunity to thank our associate producers here at Primitive Culture, Tony Black and Amy Nelson. Tony was one of the founders of this show, and we still keep him in the loop about what we're doing. You can find him on Twitter at @AJBlackWriter and online, hosting about a dozen other podcasts on everything from The X-Files to classic cinema. Amy is the host of 2 shows on the Trek FM network, Earl Grey and The Edge, and you can find her online on Twitter at Miss Amy Nelson.
You're blended all right.